Hi, welcome to Easter Eggs. We're counting down, trying to get to Easter. We're going to celebrate Easter. It's going to be big, it's going to be exciting, but we are looking for surprises on the journey to Easter, and hopefully we're finding a few together. We've spent the last couple episodes talking about the disciples who ran. In this particular moment, I want to talk about the disciple who stayed, the one who didn't run, the one who made it to the cross, the one who was standing next to Mary, the mother of Jesus, the Apostle John. It is a powerful moment in Scripture when Jesus looks down at him and looks at his mom, and he says, and again, in a paraphrase, we'll go back and we'll, I'm sure, look at the passage many, many times before we're done, but in the paraphrase, he looks at his mom and says, "Look, see what they've done. I am your son." But it is that powerful reminder that he came for so much more than people understood. And then he looked over at John, who was standing next to Mary, and he said, "Behold your mother." It was the request that Jesus was making on the cross for John to take care of his mom. It begs lots of questions. Where was the rest of the family? I mean, we know that Jesus had brothers and sisters. Why didn't they step up? Why was Jesus so concerned about his mom that he made sure that John was the one that was going to be in charge of taking care of her? Did Jesus not trust his brothers? Wouldn't the pecking order have allowed that to drop down, and all of a sudden, the next oldest would have been the one? That's not the way it was supposed to be. And Jesus refabricated the relationships and the way that people did relationships, because we know if we are a part of the family of God, we are part of his family. We're adopted into his family. That's what he does for us. At this point, John was destined to be family, and they were close. They were best friends. It was far more complicated than John being the only one who stayed. You would think that maybe Peter would be the one that Jesus would have preferred to take care of Mary and take care of that responsibility. Peter was nowhere to be found. Andrew had always been reliable. Oh my goodness, Andrew had gotten Peter there, and Peter was going to be the rock. He was that example of what faith was going to look like. And yet, Peter's nowhere to be found. Andrew's nowhere to be found. It's John. And John's there, and he's watching, and he's taking it in, and Scripture tells us, we learn from history, that he was the youngest of the disciples. He calls himself the one who Jesus loved, and Jesus loved him. He loved Jesus. And he loved Jesus enough to fulfill the dying request that Jesus made of him. "This is my mom. Take care of her." It's not an accident. It is a son taking care of his mom in the darkest moment of his life. We have no biblical record that any of Jesus' half-brothers or sisters were anywhere near the cross. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But we don't know where they were. But we do know this: John was there. And because John was there and he was willing, and because he loved Jesus, the request wasn't too much. As a matter of fact, I have a feeling that John probably nodded his head, looked at Mary. He may have muttered, "Of course." It was almost as if Jesus didn't need to say it. John was going to do it. And John was willing to do it because he loved Jesus so much. I wonder sometimes as we move toward Easter, is there anything that Jesus would ask you to do that you just wouldn't do? Because when you love him, when you really love him, is there any request that he could make that's too big? Is there any of you who are watching this where Jesus has asked you for just too much? I mean, is there anything that he could ever say to you and you would just look back at him with anger and wide-eyed and something like that? You're asking too much here, Jesus. I don't think so. This is a big ask. And John says he can handle it. And Jesus was confident in John, and he knew that he could do it because John was the one that was there. John stayed. When everybody else was afraid, John came through. And he was there when Jesus needed him most to make sure that his mom was taken care of. It's huge. Makes John very special. Makes him a little bit different than the other disciples. It gave John a added responsibility. A responsibility that he would take seriously. I've often wondered, because of John's responsibility, even take care of Mary, if that's not one of the reasons that John outlived all the other disciples, even though he was younger. That John had an extra task that he had been assigned by Jesus himself. And John had to find himself in position to be able to do that. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing picture of love. It's an amazing response in the midst of crisis. And it's an amazing portrait of love. There's nothing that Jesus is ever going to ask you to do that's too big. I promise you that. And if you will say yes, he will give to you and do for you what you need to accomplish that task. He did for John. His mother was taken care of. It was part of what he was wrapping up that day on the cross. And it's a surprise, if you think about it, that helps that Easter story come alive just a little bit more. I look forward to joining you next time here on Easter Eggs.